I sat on the edge of my son's leather sofa, careful not to leave a crease, and said I could make the turkey this year. The good one. The recipe his mother perfected when we could barely afford a proper roast, and still somehow made it taste like celebration. I even joked about bringing the old sage, stuffing his grandmother loved. In the warm light of their living room, with the smell of a new candle sweetening the air, it sounded like an easy offer. A father bringing food. A simple seat at a table. David would not meet my eyes. He watched the shine of his wedding ring as if it needed polishing. The Christmas tree behind him glowed too bright, too tall for the room. A 12-foot monument to a season that was not mine. Victoria stood at the arch to the kitchen, still in her coat, holding a sleek phone and tapping it like I was already late for something. When she looked up, her smile had the softness of a closed door. "Dad," David said, voice tight. "You are not welcome here for Christmas." The words landed with no cushion. I blinked and looked past him at the framed photographs on the wall. Our family. Then our family plus Victoria. Then more photos of dinner parties and charity galas, where I appeared smaller and farther away each year. Like a guest who had wandered into the background and never found his way back to the front. I asked him what he meant. Why would I not be welcome in the house I had helped him buy? The house where I had installed the hardwood and leveled the cabinets at midnight when the contractor quit. The house where I had stood on a ladder to hang that chandelier, while Victoria said warmer and cooler until the light looked like it belonged to a magazine. Victoria cleared her throat. "My parents are coming. We are setting a certain atmosphere. Large dinner. Important guests. We need everything to be, suitable. Suitable." I tasted the word like something left in the oven too long. I told her I would wear the navy suit. I told her I would keep conversation light and cheerful. Her smile did not move. "It is not about your suit, Anthony. It is about the tone of the evening. It is about when to speak and when to listen. My parents are very private people. They are used to a certain type of guest." David rubbed his forehead as if he could erase the moment. "Dad, please, do not make this harder. We will do something the weekend after. Maybe we can meet downtown. A steakhouse. My treat. The weekend after." Like Christmas was a dentist appointment that could be rescheduled without losing anything. I stood slowly. My knees reminded me I am 61 and that a lifetime of ladders writes its own record in the joints. I looked at the crown molding I had cut by hand, at the floorboards that had come from my credit card when their budget mysteriously broke, at the professional mixer on the counter that I had bought when Victoria went through a baking phase that lasted 3 weeks and left a row of untouched copper pans gleaming like trophies. "Where would you like me to spend Christmas then?" I asked. The question felt thin. The answer did not matter. The answer was already done. David swallowed. "Maybe Aunt Elena would love the company. Or we do something after. I promise." I nodded as if the promise had weight. I told him to tell Victoria's parents. I wished them a Merry Christmas. I said it in Spanish because that was how his mother would have said it. Warm and simple. Feliz Navidad. My voice sounded steady in the pretty room that did not belong to me. The night air outside felt like a hand on the face. Cold and blunt. I walked down the front steps I had repaired after the first winter. When the concrete split, in a long, clean line like a truth you could not argue with, I sat in my truck and let the engine idle while the tree lights blinked in their window. Somewhere in Oak Brook, another family set their table without a rehearsal. Somewhere on the south side, a boy carried a grocery bag for his mother and called it a good day. The city kept breathing without me. My phone buzzed. David's name glowed for a second and then dimmed. I did not answer. I drove the familiar way back into Chicago, past houses that wore their decorations with more heart than money, past corner bakeries that would open early for pan dulce and late for tired men who did not like going home to an empty kitchen. Snow drifted in from the lake in a clean curtain, and for a moment the whole street looked new. At each red light I did the quiet math. I always do. The down payment that lived on my home equity line. The $12,000 for the roof after that storm took half the shingles. The 3 sets of appliances. The landscaping Victoria picked from a design blog. The monthly transfer set to leave my account like clockwork. The one I barely looked at anymore because it hurt to see how fast help turns into obligation. By the time I turned onto my block, the snow had settled into a soft glaze on the sidewalks. My bungalow looked like it had taken a deep breath and fallen asleep. Inside, I hung my coat on the same hook I had used since the year Rosa and I moved in. Her scarf still hung there too. I never had the heart to put it away. The kitchen carried the faint smell of cumin and coffee, and it felt like a blessing. The phone buzzed again. Victoria's name, this time. I let it ring. I stood at the sink and watched the street lamp turn the snow gold. I told the quiet room what I had not said in the bright one. I told the room that I was done asking to be invited to my own family. I told the room that I had given enough. I pulled the old shoebox from the cabinet above the fridge. The one where I keep the important things I do not want to see every day. Bank letters. Printed emails. A stack of receipts held together by a rubber band. I set them on the table like a dealer laying down cards. The numbers did not blink. The numbers did not care about tone or suitable guests. The numbers told the story. I sat with them until the clock in the living room ticked past midnight and into a new day that would not be spent begging for a chair. When I finally reached for the phone, I did not call David. I did not call Victoria. I scrolled to my bank instead. My finger hovered for a moment, and I could almost hear Rosa laugh the way she used to when something hurt and she refused to show it. Then I pressed the number and waited for a voice to answer. The next morning, Chicago was still dressed in white. Snow piled on porches and muffled the hum of traffic. But inside my bungalow, the silence was louder than the storm. I brewed coffee stronger than usual, the way Rosa used to make it when bills came due, and carried the mug to my desk in the corner of the living room. The oak desk was older than David, scratched and worn, but solid. On it lay the shoebox I had pulled down last night. I opened the lid and the smell of old paper rose like a ghost. Receipts. Bank statements. Mortgage notices, all the proof of my generosity that had gone unacknowledged. One by one, I spread them across the desk until the surface looked like a crime scene. Each slip of paper was evidence of how I had bled myself dry. First year, the down payment for David and Victoria's Oak Brook house, $42,000 from my own home equity line. I remembered the bank officer's look of hesitation. Mr. Ramirez, are you sure? This puts your retirement at risk. I had smiled and signed. A father helps his son. That was the logic. Second year, the new roof after the hailstorm. $12,800 charged to my credit card. I could still hear Victoria's sigh when the first contractor quoted a cheaper option. We need the kind that lasts 20 years, she said, as if roofs were designer handbags. Third year, the kitchen remodel. Granite countertops. A double-door refrigerator. A 6-burner stove that Victoria claimed she couldn't host without. $19,400 total. I ate ramen for weeks while she posted photos of our new kitchen online, tagging her friends with captions about blessings. Then the regular bleed, $2,900 every month, automatically siphoned from my account to theirs. I added the figures on my calculator. $34,800 a year. 5 years. $174,000. Add the down payment, the roof, the kitchen, and dozens of smaller emergencies, furniture, utility bills, a landscaping project that cost more than my truck. The total crossed $220,000. I sat back in my chair and stared at the number on the screen until it blurred. $220,000. That was Rosa's life insurance money. That was the nest egg we had hoped would carry me through retirement. That was college tuition for grandchildren I might never meet. My throat tightened. For 5 years, I had told myself it was temporary, that one day David would stand on his own feet. Instead, the more I gave, the smaller I became in his life, until I was not even welcome for Christmas. The phone sat heavy in my hand as I dialed the bank. A recorded voice offered options, cheerful and distant. Finally, a live operator came on. A young woman named Sheila. "How can I help you today?" "Mr. Rader." "Ramirez? I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said, my voice steady, though my hand trembled. "Of course. Can you give me the account details?" I read them out. She typed quickly. "I see it here. $2. 900. On the 15th of every month to Wells Fargo. Mortgage? You've been making this transfer for looks like 60 months. 5 years. I said quietly. "Yes. Sir, do you want to stop this effective immediately?" I looked at the cracked paint on my living room wall, at the sagging porch light outside, both neglected because I had poured money into someone else's dream. "Effective immediately." Her keyboard clicked. "Done. The transfer has been canceled. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I closed my eyes and let the word roll off my tongue like a prayer. "No." When I hung up, the house felt different, lighter, like a burden had finally been set down. For the first time in 5 years, I knew next month's budget would balance. For the first time since Rosa died, I could spend money on myself without shame. I gathered the papers into a neat stack. They had no power over me anymore. I carried them to the fireplace, struck a match, and fed them to the flames. One by one, the pages curled and blackened. The smell of ink and ash filled the room. And with it came something else. Release. When the last page crumbled, I poured myself a glass of bourbon I had been saving for a special occasion. Tonight felt special enough. I raised the glass toward Rosa's picture on the mantel. "Merry Christmas to me," I whispered. And for the first time in years, I meant it. I leaned back in my chair, watching the fire die to embers, and realized something vital. I was no longer a silent benefactor, no longer a background figure in photographs where my face was fading. I was a man who had finally drawn a line. And though I did not know it yet, this was only the first move in a war my son and his in-laws had already declared. The December sun slid pale through the blinds the next morning, and for the first time in years, I woke without that gnawing weight in my chest. No transfer hanging over me. No debt to justify. Just coffee, silence, and a strange sense of freedom. It lasted less than an hour. At exactly 9:14 a.m., my phone buzzed across the kitchen counter. Victoria. I thought about ignoring it, letting her words fall into voicemail. But something in me wanted to hear what she would say when the ATM stopped spitting bills. I answered on the third ring. "Anthony," she said briskly. "Not even a hello? I need you to pick up my parents from O'Hare this afternoon. Their flight from Boston lands at 2. You have a truck, right? It'll fit their luggage." I almost laughed. "Did you forget our conversation yesterday?" She sighed, as though I were a stubborn employee instead of her husband's father. "Look, whatever that was about, we need to focus on practical matters now. My parents can't just stand around an airport. You're the only one with free time. And it's what family does. Anthony. Family helps." Her voice sharpened, each word like a little knife. "Besides, let's be honest, you're not my rival. You're too small for that. So just drive to baggage claim, pick them up, and wear something decent." My parents noticed things like that. The silence that followed was thick. For years I would have swallowed it, nodded, and driven to the airport in the snow. But the match that had burned those statements last night still glowed inside me. "What airline?" I asked quietly. "United. Flight 325. Carousel 3. They'll expect someone who can handle their luggage without embarrassing us." I kept my tone mild. "Of course. I'll take care of everything." "Good," she said, relieved. "And Anthony, try not to smell like work. Maybe that blue shirt you wore to David's graduation. You looked almost presentable then." The line clicked dead. I set my phone down beside my coffee and stared at it until the steam from the mug curled into nothing. 2 o'clock. Flight 325. Carousel 3. Plenty of time to do absolutely nothing. At 2:15. I was in my armchair with a cup of Earl Grey and the Chicago Tribune crossword spread open. By 3. I had filled in 12 across, delayed gratification. The answer was patience. By 3:30. My phone buzzed in angry rhythm. First Victoria. Then a strange number I didn't recognize. I let them all ring. By 4. I unplugged the landline from the wall and shut my cell off completely. It was nearly 5 when the pounding started. Not a polite knock. A battering ram of fists slamming into my front door. I rose slowly, already knowing exactly who I would see. Through the peephole, 3 figures crowded on my stoop, their breath fogging in the frigid air like smoke from a fire. I opened the door. Charles Whitmore shoved past me before I could even speak. His face was flushed with rage, the veins in his neck bulging. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he barked. We waited at O'Hare for 3 hours. Behind him, Margaret's usually perfect hair was frizzed from wind. Her lips pinched white. She scanned my modest living room with disdain, as if the peeling wallpaper personally insulted her. "This is barbaric," she snapped, leaving us stranded like animals. At our age, do you realize how dangerous that was? Victoria entered last. Her designer coat wrinkled, mascara streaked. Her voice was shrill. "You humiliated us. Anthony, do you know what you've done?" My parents had to take a taxi like common tourists. Everyone at the terminal saw us waiting. The 3 of them circled me in my own house, like wolves, hurling accusations faster than I could reply. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move from where I stood by the door. "This is my home," I said evenly, my voice cutting through their noise. "And I want you out." They froze, stunned. It was the first time I had ever spoken to them like that. Charles jabbed a finger toward my chest. "You don't get to talk to me that way. I've built more connections in Chicago than you could imagine. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," I said. "You're a guest who just overstayed his welcome." Margaret's mouth curled into a cold smile. "You think you can treat us like this without consequences? My husband knows everyone who matters. Business leaders, editors, judges. One word from him, and you'll be a pariah." Victoria's voice rose in a shriek. "You've ruined everything. You'll regret this." I stepped aside and held the door wide. The winter air gusted in, sharp and clean. "The lesson is over. Leave." Charles leaned close, his breath hot with fury. "This isn't over. Ramirez. You've just declared war, and you don't even know it." "Then I'll be ready," I said calmly. They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Through the window, I watched them march to their rental car, still arguing among themselves. For a long moment, I stood in the sudden quiet of my living room. My heart should have been racing. Instead, it beat slow and steady. For the first time in years, I was not the man who obeyed. But their parting words echoed in my mind: connections, consequences, public humiliation. And I knew this was not the end. It was the opening move. 3 mornings later, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee when the headline stopped me cold. "Chicago Man Abandons Elderly Couple at O'Hare During Winter Storm." Below it was a photo of me, an old picture lifted from my company's outdated website. My jaw tightened. The story painted me as a cruel, unstable man who had left an aging couple stranded in dangerous weather. Charles and Margaret Whitmore were quoted at length. "We were terrified," Charles said. "At our age, 3 hours in those conditions could have been deadly." He ignored our calls. This was erratic, dangerous behavior. Dangerous conditions? The day had been 48 degrees and clear skies. No snow. No storm. Just lies printed in black and white. I set my mug down before I shattered it. They had called in favors. I could see the strategy immediately. Charles had whispered into the right ears, at the right clubs. And now I was the villain in Chicago's third largest paper. For the first time in years, I felt something sharp in my chest, not shame, not grief, respect. They knew how to play dirty. But so did I. I pulled my laptop closer, fingers tapping with a steadiness I hadn't felt in a long time. If they wanted to drag me through the mud, I would show the city exactly who they were. First tab, bank statements. I highlighted every $2,900 monthly transfer, printed them, stacked them by year, 5 years, 60 payments, over $174,000. Second tab, receipts. The roof replacement, $12,800. Kitchen remodel, $19,400. Furniture orders from Macy's, $7,200. Landscaping project, $6,000. Add it all, over $220,000. Siphoned from me into their perfect suburban dream. Third tab, Victoria's Instagram. Photos of their blessed life, her diamond earrings shining under chandeliers I'd bought. Vacation selfies in Napa while I covered their utility bills. Captions like "Our beautiful home," "Grateful for our success." I downloaded every one. Fourth tab, David's LinkedIn. My stomach twisted when I saw it. His recent connection, Patricia Klein, lifestyle editor at the Chicago Tribune. The same name under the byline of the smear piece. My son had helped them sharpen the knife. The betrayal settled into my bones, cold and heavy. They hadn't just cut me out of Christmas. They had tried to erase my dignity in public. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the piles of paper forming around me. Bank statements, receipts, social posts, lies highlighted in red ink on the Tribune article I had printed out. The evidence didn't just prove my side. It painted a portrait of parasites dressed as aristocrats. I opened a new document and typed a single word at the top. Timeline. Underneath, I listed every payment, every favor, every sacrifice, year by year. I matched each one with the social media posts flaunting what they had bought with my money. I marked the articles' falsehoods in bold, noting the truth beside each. By midnight, the dossier was thick enough to choke on. I slid everything into a leather briefcase that hadn't been used since Rosa's funeral. Then I circled a date on my wall calendar. December 24. Not Christmas. Not anymore. A trial date. A reckoning. Because according to Victoria's Facebook, they were hosting a lavish Christmas Eve dinner for 12 guests' family, friends, business associates, people who read the Tribune, people who mattered in their world. Perfect. I poured myself one last glass of bourbon and stood by the window, watching the city lights blink in the cold night. They thought they had written my ending in the newspaper, but they had only written the introduction. This story wasn't going to close in print. It was going to close in their own dining room. Christmas Eve in Chicago always carries a certain kind of electricity. The city glows under strings of lights. Shop windows flicker with gold and green, and even the air smells of cinnamon and exhaust. Families gather close. Laughter leaks from houses. But that night, I wasn't walking toward warmth. I was walking into enemy territory. At 6:30 p.m., I parked across the street from David and Victoria's Oak Brook mansion. Their driveway was lined with imported cars, the kind that cost more than my entire bungalow. Through the wide front windows, I could see movement, guests in cocktail attire, glasses of wine flashing under chandeliers I had paid for. The table was dressed in silver and crystal, and at the head, Victoria smiled like a queen in her kingdom. I checked my watch, 6:45. Perfect. Dinner would be in full swing. No easy exits. No polite excuses. My leather briefcase sat beside me on the seat. Inside, 15 packets of evidence, bank statements, receipts, photos, and copies of the Tribune article with lies underlined in red. Enough truth to strip them bare in front of their own circle. I straightened my navy suit, the one I had worn to Rosa's funeral. Tonight it wasn't for grief. It was for resurrection. The front door, predictably, was unlocked. Victoria loved to brag about how safe her neighborhood was, how they didn't need to worry about locks like people in the city. I pushed it open quietly. The warmth and scent of rosemary hit me like a wall. Voices floated from the dining room. Margaret Whitmore's drawl, smooth and superior. But darling, that's not how we do things in our family. Laughter rippled around the table. I tightened my grip on the briefcase. Family. That word again, twisted into a blade that cut me out of my own bloodline. I walked into the dining room. 12 heads turned. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. The laughter died so quickly, it felt like someone had cut the power. Good evening, I said calmly, setting my briefcase on the marble sideboard. I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration. The silence was thick enough to choke. Victoria was the first to recover. Her smile cracked. Anthony, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave immediately. Actually, I said, flipping open the briefcase, I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this dinner. For this house. For this entire lifestyle you've been parading around. I took out the first packet and handed it to the woman nearest me, a silver-haired guest in pearls who blinked in confusion. Then I circled the table, dropping packets in front of each guest. Paper rustled as curious fingers began to flip through the pages. Those are bank records, I explained conversationally. 5 years of mortgage payments, $174. 000 from my account straight into theirs. The down payment? $42. 000 from my home equity line. Renovations? Nearly $40. 000. Furniture. Landscaping. Even the kitchen appliances you've been admiring tonight all bought with my money. A man in a pinstriped suit squinted at the papers. This can't be right. Oh. It's right, I said. Every receipt. Every statement. The truth written in black ink. Whispers broke out around the table. Shocked glances darted toward Victoria and David. Victoria's voice rose, brittle with panic. He's having some kind of breakdown. David, call someone. Before you do that, I cut in, pulling another stack of papers from the briefcase. Let's discuss the article you all read in the Tribune. I laid copies across the table. My photo glared back from the page, the headline screaming lies. The one where I supposedly abandoned these poor elderly people at O'Hare during a winter storm. Guests scanned the clippings, eyes widening as they noticed my handwritten notes in the margins. Lie scrawled next to Charlie's claim of dangerous weather. False beside the description of erratic behavior. The man in the pinstripe suit looked up, but it was 50 degrees that day. There was no storm. Exactly, I said. They weren't stranded tourists. They were Victoria's, parents, guests. I refused to chauffeur after they told me I wasn't worthy of sitting at this very table. Gasps circled the room. One of Margaret's charity friends turned on her. Margaret, surely you didn't say that. Margaret's face flushed, her lips tightening. This is being twisted. I pulled out my phone. Screen glowing with screenshots of Victoria's social media. Twisted or documented. Hare's Victoria bragging about their success, while I was covering their utility bills. Here she is, showing off jewelry. Vacations. Designer coats, all bought during months when I was paying their mortgage. The room shifted like tectonic plates. Guests stared at Victoria, and David not with admiration, but with disgust. Catherine, one of Margaret's closest friends, slammed her folder shut. This is unconscionable. Anthony's generosity kept your house standing, and you repay him by publicly smearing his name? Victoria's face crumpled. This isn't fair, he volunteered. I raised my voice just enough to cut her off. I didn't volunteer to be slandered in the press. I didn't volunteer to be erased from my own family. I looked around the table, at every set of eyes now locked on me. You've all been told a story about a cruel, unstable man who abandoned his family. Tonight you've seen the real story. The story of a father who gave everything, only to be told he wasn't welcome at his own son's Christmas. David finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, I didn't know about the article. Your wife knew, I said coldly, and her parents orchestrated it. The silence that followed was deeper than any church I'd ever stepped into, the kind that comes right before the ground breaks open. I closed my briefcase and straightened my tie. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. It's the last one I'll ever pay for. As I turned to leave, voices erupted behind me. Questions. Accusations. The sound of a social empire collapsing in real time. To me, it sounded like music. The air outside was sharp enough to cut skin, but I felt strangely warm as I crossed the street to my truck. Behind me, the Whitmore's mansion hummed with chaos, raised voices, chairs scraping, the brittle sound of glass hitting a table too hard. Their perfect dinner was unraveling, thread by thread. I drove home through the glitter of Chicago's Christmas Eve lights. But the scene I'd left behind kept replaying in my mind. The looks on their guests' faces, the way admiration had drained into disgust. For once, the truth had walked into their pristine dining room and refused to leave quietly. The collapse came faster than even I expected. By the following morning, my phone buzzed non-stop with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Screenshots of a video started popping up grainy, but clear enough. One of the dinner guests had recorded everything. The briefcase, the evidence packets, my voice cutting through Victoria's denials. Uploaded to Facebook, then shared again. By noon on Christmas Day, the video had gone viral in Chicago's business circles. Oakbrook family exposed, read the captions. Comments poured in. Some condemned them for hypocrisy, others marveled at my composure. One simply said, "This is what happens when you mistake generosity for weakness." The Whitmore's carefully polished social reputation cracked like ice on the river. At Margaret's charity guild, whispers turned to open snubs. Her name was quietly removed from an upcoming fundraiser committee. The gala where Shed planned to make a speech about dignity was suddenly postponed. Charles fared worse. His cronies at the Chicago Business Club stopped returning his calls. His banker friends, the same ones had leaned on to plant the Tribune smear, distanced themselves. Nobody wanted to be seen backing a man exposed as a leech. As for Victoria, her Instagram comments turned poisonous overnight. Friends Shed once flaunted her lifestyle to asked in public posts how many of her luxury items had been sponsored by her father-in-law's checkbook. Her glamorous photos became exhibits of fraud. By New Year's Eve, she locked her account. Though David was silent. No posts. No calls. Just absence. Like a shadow that forgot to follow. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the story spread like fire. For once, I didn't feel the sting of humiliation. The spotlight wasn't on me. It was on them. Still, there was a strange hollowness under the satisfaction. I'd lived long enough to know social standing in Chicago could collapse faster than snow sliding from a roof. But the damage was permanent. No one invited them back to the circle they'd worshipped for years. And I remembered the last thing Charles had said to me at my own front door. "You'll regret this. It will be very public." He was right about the public part. But he had picked the wrong man to smear. Now it was his family's shame lit up in front of the city. I poured myself another cup of coffee and leaned back. Their collapse had only just begun. Because while social disgrace spreads quickly, foreclosure papers take their time. And those papers were already in the mail. Winter bled into March, and Chicago's snow gave way to gray slush and biting wind. Life in my bungalow had grown quiet, steady. For the first time in years, my budget balanced. The mortgage was mine alone. I fixed the porch light, painted the living room, even bought myself a new recliner. Simple things, but each one felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. Then the letter came. Delivered by certified mail, heavy envelope, government seal on the corner. I signed for it at the door, already knowing what it was. Notice of default. 3 months of missed mortgage payments on the Oak Brook house. $8. 700 inches arrears. 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure proceedings. I laid it on the table, next to Rosa's photo and my coffee mug, and read it twice. The words might as well have been written in stone. The house I had bled for was slipping through their hands. The second I stepped away, my phone had been ringing for weeks with calls. I didn't answer. Victoria's frantic voicemails, Charlotte's furious threats, even Margaret's icy tones cracking into desperation. I blocked every number. But then, one Thursday evening, there was a knock at my door. Not the pounding of entitlement I'd heard before. A slow, hesitant knock. I opened it to see my son. David looked older, as if 3 months had carved a decade into his face. Dark circles, wrinkled suit, tie askew. His confidence was gone, stripped down to something raw and frightened. "Dad," he said softly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him in. He sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor like a schoolboy waiting for punishment. His eyes darted around the room at the fresh paint, the new recliner, the repaired light fixture, the home improvements I'd finally done for myself once I stopped paying for his life. "Nice place," he murmured. "It's what happens when you spend money on yourself instead of people who don't respect it," I replied. He winced but nodded. "I deserve that." I poured him a glass of water, sat across from him, and waited. After a long silence, he said, "Dad, I am sorry. For Christmas. For that article. For everything. I should have defended you. I should have stood up to them years ago." He ran his hands through his hair, trembling. "I didn't know my father-in-law went to the Tribune. I didn't know what they were saying about Mom behind your back. They told me," his voice broke. "They said she knew her place better than you, that she understood boundaries." My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Your mother had more grace in her little finger than their entire family combined. Don't ever repeat their poison in my house again." Tears welled in his eyes. "I know. I know that now." He swallowed hard. "Dad, the house, it's in foreclosure. We can't make the payments without you." I leaned forward, letting each word land heavy. "Without me. Without the man you threw out of Christmas like he was an embarrassment." He flinched as if struck. "Please. Dad. We're going to lose everything. The house. Victoria's. Respect for me. Her parents' approval. I don't know what he'll do." "You'll figure it out," I said. Not unkindly. The same way I figured out how to live without my son when he chose them over me. He broke then, crying quietly, shoulders shaking. "I lost you. Didn't I? I gave you away." I studied him for a long moment. This man I had raised, worked for, sacrificed for, the boy who once held my hand at Lincoln Park Zoo, pointing at lions with wide eyes, now reduced to a hollow shell, wrecked by his own choices. "You didn't lose me," I said finally. "You gave me away. And now you're asking if I'll come back like nothing happened. Forgiveness doesn't work that way." He lifted his head, hope flickering. "So is there any chance? Any way you could forgive me?" "I forgave you months ago," I said, and meant it. "But forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It doesn't mean I'll keep paying for a life that excluded me. If you want a relationship with me, you'll have to build it from scratch. With respect. With honesty. Not with my money." The hope in his eyes dimmed, replaced with something heavier understanding. He nodded slowly. "You're right. About all of it. I know I don't deserve another chance. But I want to try." He stood, straightening his shoulders for the first time in months. "Thank you for hearing me out. And Dad, for what it's worth. That night, when you stood up for yourself at Christmas dinner, I was embarrassed. I was angry. But I was proud of you. 2. I said nothing, only watched him walk out into the Chicago night. When the door closed, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and stepped onto the porch. Spring was edging into the city, the air carrying faint warmth. Across the street, a neighbor's children laughed, chasing each other with sparklers left over from New Year's. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The house in Oak Brook would fall. The Whitmore's empire of lies would crumble. And I had finally chosen myself over the people who saw me as nothing but a bank account. Easter Sunday arrived with the smell of spring in Chicago. Tulips pushed through the soil along neighborhood sidewalks, and the air carried that rare mix of sunlight and lake breeze. Families spilled from church doors in bright clothes, arms full of flowers and baskets. I wasn't in Oak Brook. I wasn't standing in a mansion that had eaten my retirement alive. I was in Pilsen, walking up the familiar steps of my sister Elena's, too flat. Her house smelled like tamales and cilantro, laughter tumbling out before I even rang the bell. When the door opened, I was pulled inside, hugged by nieces and nephews, handed a plate before I could take off my coat. Elena grinned. "About time you showed up and let someone else feed you." The table was crowded, but no one asked me to prove I belonged there. No one weighed my worth against bank accounts or last names. When my nephew Daniel showed me his art project, I saw more pride in his eyes than I'd seen in my own son's in years. And it hit me. Family wasn't just blood. It was who opened their door and said, "Sit. Eat. We're glad you're here." Later, as the sun set over the city, I returned to my bungalow. I poured a glass of bourbon and sat on the porch, watching the street lamp flicker on. Beside me on the little table was Rosa's photo, and next to it a new one, me, with Elena's family, smiling at Easter dinner. I thought about David, about the broken man who had stood in this very room, asking for forgiveness. And I realized I had already given it to him. But forgiveness, I understood now, is not the same as surrender. It doesn't mean paying for someone else's mistakes forever. It doesn't mean erasing years of betrayal. It means letting go of the bitterness so it doesn't poison what's left of your life. The house in Oak Brook would likely be sold. The Whitmores would fade from the circles they worshipped. Maybe David would find a way to rebuild. Maybe not. That was his journey to make. Mine was different. As the first fireflies blinked over the street, I raised my glass. "To Rosa," I whispered. "To dignity. To finally learning the difference between love and obligation. Because here's what I know now. Love is not measured in dollars. Respect is not earned by writing checks. And family, the real kind, never tells you you're not welcome at the table." I sat back, letting the city hum around me. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a burden. It looked like freedom. And that, I thought, was the lesson worth keeping.